The old brick building at 247 Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn had seen better days, but it had never seen anything quite like what Sarah Martinez experienced on the night of October 15th, 2024. At 11:47 p.m., as she was settling into bed in her apartment 4A, Sarah heard something that made her question her own sanity, the distinct sound of a couple having dinner conversation coming from the apartment directly above her, apartment 4B, which had been empty for over 3 decades. "Are you going to finish those potatoes, Jen?" came a man's voice, clear as day through the thin ceiling. "I'm too nervous to eat, Michael. What if we made the wrong decision?" replied a woman's voice, tinged with anxiety. Sarah sat up in bed, straining to listen. She had moved into the building 6 months earlier and had been told by Mrs. Chen, the elderly building manager, that 4B had been vacant since 1992 following some kind of tragedy. The apartment had remained sealed by police order and had never been re-rented. "Honey, we talked about this," the man's voice continued above. "The job in Seattle is a great opportunity. We'll make new friends, start fresh." Sarah grabbed her phone and called the building manager. Mrs. Chen answered on the 4th ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Mrs. Chen, this is Sarah from 4A. There are people in the apartment above me. I can hear them talking." There was a long pause before Mrs. Chen responded, her voice suddenly alert. "Miss Martinez, that's impossible. Apartment 4B has been empty for 32 years. The door is still sealed with police tape. I'm telling you, I can hear a man and woman having dinner and talking about moving to Seattle." Another pause, then Mrs. Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'll be right up." Mrs. Chen arrived at Sarah's apartment 10 minutes later, accompanied by her grandson Tommy, a college student who helped with building maintenance. The 3 of them stood in Sarah's living room, directly below apartment 4B, and listened. "Don't know why you're so worried about the neighbors," came the man's voice. "Mrs. Patterson from 3B is sweet, and that young couple in 4A seem nice enough." Sarah looked at Mrs. Chen with wide eyes. "Mrs. Patterson died in 2018, and I'm the one living in 4A now." Mrs. Chen's face had gone pale. "Miss Martinez, the couple that disappeared from 4B were named Jennifer and Michael Thompson. They were planning to move to Seattle for Michael's new job. That was in October 1992. Tommy, who had been recording the voices on his phone, played back what he'd captured. The audio was crystal clear, a conversation between 2 people discussing their dinner and their upcoming move, as if it were happening in real time. "We need to call the police," Mrs. Chen said, her hands shaking slightly. This is not normal." Detective Ray Morrison of the NYPD's 84th Precinct had worked his share of strange cases during his 23 years on the force. But the call he received at 12:47 a.m. on October 16, 2024, was unlike anything he'd encountered. When he arrived at 247 Atlantic Avenue, he found 3 witnesses who all insisted they were hearing conversations from an apartment that had been empty since the Clinton administration. "Detective Morrison," Mrs. Chen explained as they stood in the building's narrow hallway, "I've managed this building for 40 years. Apartment 4B has been sealed since 1992, when Jennifer and Michael Thompson vanished without a trace. No one has been inside since the police investigation was closed in 1995. Detective Morrison examined the door to 4B. The police tape from 1992 was still intact, though yellowed and brittle with age. The multiple locks showed no signs of tampering, and there was a thin layer of dust on the doorframe that hadn't been disturbed. "What exactly did you hear?" he asked Sarah Martinez. "2 people having dinner and talking about their move to Seattle. The woman sounded nervous, the man was reassuring her. They mentioned neighbors by name, people who haven't lived here for years or who died decades ago." As if summoned by the conversation, voices began emanating from behind the sealed door. "Jen, did you hear that? Sounded like people talking in the hallway," came the man's voice, now clearly audible to everyone present. "It's probably just Mrs. Chen checking on things," replied the woman. "She's so conscientious about the building." Detective Morrison felt the hair on his arms stand up. He pulled out his radio and called for backup, though he wasn't sure what crime, if any, was being committed. "This is Detective Morrison requesting supervisor response to 247 Atlantic Avenue. I've got an unusual situation involving a 30-year-old missing persons case." While they waited for additional officers, Detective Morrison decided to research the original case. Using his phone, he accessed the NYPD database and pulled up the file on Jennifer and Michael Thompson. The case file painted a picture of a couple who had simply vanished from their locked apartment on October 20th, 1992. Jennifer Thompson, 28, was a graphic designer. Michael Thompson, also 28, was a software engineer who had recently accepted a position with a tech company in Seattle. They had been planning to move at the end of October. On the evening of October 20th, neighbors reported hearing normal dinner conversation from their apartment around 8 p.m. When Michael failed to show up for work the next day, and neither Jennifer nor Michael answered repeated phone calls, building management used their master key to check on them. They found the apartment exactly as if the couple had simply stepped out for a moment. Dinner plates on the table with food still on them, the television on, Jennifer's purse on the counter, Michael's wallet on the dresser. No signs of struggle, no indications of packing for their planned move. The couple had simply vanished. "Detective," Sarah Martinez interrupted his reading, "they're talking again." Indeed, the voices had resumed, and now Detective Morrison could hear them clearly. "Michael, I keep having this strange feeling like we're being watched," Jennifer's voice said. "Like there are people outside our door." "Don't be silly, honey. It's just pre-move jitters. Everything will be fine once we get to Seattle." Detective Morrison made a decision that would either make or break his reputation. He approached the door and spoke loudly enough to be heard through the wood. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, this is Detective Ray Morrison with the New York Police Department. We need to speak with you." The silence that followed was profound and unsettling. For nearly 5 minutes, no sounds came from the apartment. Then, tentatively, Michael's voice responded. "Police? We haven't done anything wrong, we're just having dinner." "Sir, we need to ask you some questions about your disappearance. Can you open the door?" "Our disappearance." Jennifer's voice, confused and frightened. "We haven't disappeared. We're right here." Detective Morrison looked at Mrs. Chen, who was staring at the door in disbelief. "Mr. Thompson, what date do you think it is?" "It's October 20th, 1992, Michael replied immediately. "We're supposed to leave for Seattle tomorrow morning." "Sir, today's date is October 16th, 2024. You and your wife have been missing for 32 years. The silence stretched for so long that everyone present wondered if the voices had stopped altogether. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was small and confused. "That's impossible. We were just having dinner. We were talking about the move. How could 32 years have passed?" Sergeant Linda Park arrived with 2 additional officers and a locksmith 20 minutes later. She listened to Detective Morrison's briefing with professional skepticism until she heard the voices herself. "In 30 years of police work," she told Morrison quietly, "I've never heard of anything like this. Are we sure this isn't some kind of hoax?" "I've examined the door, Sergeant. The police seal from 1992 is intact, the locks haven't been tampered with, and we have multiple witnesses who heard the same conversations. Either this is the most elaborate prank in NYPD history, or we're dealing with something genuinely unexplained." The locksmith, a man named Pete Kowalski, who had worked with the NYPD for over 20 years, began the process of opening the apartment door. As he worked, the voices continued intermittently. "Michael, I'm scared." Jennifer's voice came through the door. "Something feels very wrong." "I know, Jen. I can feel it too. It's like time isn't working the way it should." When the final lock clicked open, Sergeant Park drew her weapon and slowly pushed the door open. What they found inside apartment 4B defied all logical explanation. The apartment was exactly as described in the 1992 police report. Dinner plates on the table, food still visible, though now mummified after 3 decades. The television was on, displaying static, since the analog broadcast signals it had been receiving no longer existed. A bottle of wine sat open on the counter, its contents long evaporated, but there was no sign of Jennifer and Michael Thompson. "Where are you?" Detective Morrison called out. "We can hear you, but we can't see you." "We're right here," Michael's voice responded, seeming to come from the living room area. "Can't you see us? We're sitting at the dinner table." The officers looked at the dining table, which was clearly empty except for the decades-old meal remnants. "Michael, Jennifer, I need you to look around and tell me what you see," Detective Morrison said. "I see our apartment," Jennifer replied, her voice wavering. "The table, our dinner, the TV playing the evening news. But something's wrong. The colors seem faded, and I feel like I'm looking through frosted glass." Detective Morrison noticed something that made his pulse quicken. On the dusty surface of the dining table, 2 sets of fresh fingerprints were slowly appearing, as if invisible hands were pressing against the wood. "Sergeant Park," he whispered, "look at the table." As they watched, the fingerprints became more defined, joined by what appeared to be palm prints. The dusty outlines of 2 people sitting at the table became visible, though no actual bodies could be seen. "Oh, God!" Jennifer's voice came through, now panic-stricken. "Michael, I can see through my hands. I can see through my hands." "Jen, stay calm," Michael's voice, though he sounded equally terrified. "Whatever's happening, we'll figure it out together." Detective Morrison had worked enough cases to know when he was in over his head. This was no longer just a missing persons case. It was something that required expertise he didn't possess. "Sergeant, I need you to contact the FBI's Unusual Phenomena Unit," he said quietly, "and see if we can get a paranormal researcher down here. Whatever happened to the Thompsons 32 years ago, I don't think it's something conventional police work is going to solve." As the officers began securing the scene, the voices from the invisible couple continued, their conversation providing disturbing insights into their situation. "Michael, I remember dinner, and I remember going to bed. But after that, it's like everything became a dream," Jennifer's voice said. "And now these people are here saying it's been 32 years. I remember the same thing, honey. It's like we've been living the same day over and over, but time has been passing in the real world." Detective Morrison made notes of everything he was hearing. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, do you remember anything unusual happening on October 20th, 1992? Anything that might explain your situation?" "The apartment felt cold that night," Michael replied. "Colder than it should have been, and there were strange sounds, like whispers in the walls. The landlord had mentioned some kind of renovation work in the basement," Jennifer added. "Something about updating electrical systems. Workers had been in and out of the building for weeks." Mrs. Chen, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. "Detective, I remember that renovation. Mr. Kowalski, the previous building owner, hired a company to install new wiring throughout the building. They were doing work in the basement and the walls." "What kind of company?" Detective Morrison asked. "I don't remember the name, but I remember the workers seemed strange. They worked odd hours and they were very secretive about what they were doing." As the initial investigation continued, more neighbors began to gather in the hallway, drawn by the police presence. Several of them reported that they had heard voices from 4B intermittently over the years, but had assumed it was pipes or building settling. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3A admitted that she had heard the voices for decades but had been too embarrassed to report them. "I thought I was going crazy," she said, "but it was always the same couple, always talking about the same things. Dinner, the move to Seattle, wondering about sounds in the hallway." Detective Morrison realized that Jennifer and Michael Thompson had been trapped in some kind of temporal loop for 32 years, reliving the same evening over and over while the real world moved on without them. But the question remained, what had caused this phenomenon, and more importantly, was there any way to free them from their decades-long imprisonment? As the first chapter of this investigation concluded, Detective Morrison knew he was facing the most challenging case of his career. Two people had been trapped between worlds for over 3 decades, visible only as dust impressions and audible voices, apparently unaware that time had been passing around them. The apartment held more secrets than just the missing couple. Whatever had happened to Jennifer and Michael Thompson on that October night in 1992 was connected to the mysterious renovation work that had been done in the building. And Detective Morrison suspected that unlocking that connection would be the key to understanding one of the most bizarre missing persons cases in NYPD history. As he prepared to dive deeper into the investigation, one thing was certain: the Thompson apartment was no ordinary cold case. It was a window into something that challenged the very understanding of reality itself, and finding the truth would require methods and expertise that went far beyond conventional police work. The voices from apartment 4B continued their eternal conversation as the investigation team prepared for what would become one of the most unusual cases in New York City's history. Dr. Elena Vasquez from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit arrived at 247 Atlantic Avenue at 6 a.m. on October 17, 2024, accompanied by Dr. Marcus Webb, a quantum physicist from Columbia University who specialized in temporal anomalies. Detective Morrison had specifically requested experts who could provide scientific insight into what was clearly beyond conventional investigation. "Detective Morrison," Dr. Vasquez said as she examined the apartment 4B scene, "in 20 years of investigating unusual phenomena, I've never encountered anything quite like this. You're certain the voices are coming from the apartment itself, not from some external source?" "Positive," Detective Morrison replied. "We've had acoustic specialists examine the building. The voices are definitely originating from inside this apartment, and they correspond with physical manifestations, fingerprints, impressions in dust, even temperature changes." Dr. Webb was running electromagnetic field detection equipment throughout the apartment, while the invisible couple continued their eternal conversation about their planned move to Seattle. "The electromagnetic readings are fascinating," Dr. Webb announced. "There are significant fluctuations in the quantum field, precisely in the areas where you hear the voices strongest. It's almost as if two people exist here in a parallel temporal dimension." "Is that actually possible?" Detective Morrison asked. "Until today, I would have said no. But the evidence suggests that Jennifer and Michael Thompson are somehow trapped in a temporal loop, experiencing the same day repeatedly while existing slightly out of phase with our current timeline." Mrs. Chen had spent the night researching the 1992 renovation work and had discovered information that added new dimensions to the mystery. "Detective," she said, approaching him with a folder full of old documents, "I found the records from the 1992 electrical work. The company was called Temporal Dynamics, Inc., and they weren't just installing new wiring. They were conducting some kind of experimental energy research." Detective Morrison examined the contracts and permits. "Temporal Dynamics, Inc. That's an odd name for an electrical contractor." "That's what I thought, so I did some research. The company was founded by Dr. Richard Kowalski, the previous building owner's nephew. He had a PhD in theoretical physics from MIT and several patents related to electromagnetic field manipulation. Dr. Webb looked up from his equipment. Kowalski, I know that name. He published several controversial papers in the early 1990s about using electromagnetic fields to create temporal distortions. The scientific community largely dismissed his work as pseudoscience. What kind of temporal distortions? Dr. Vasquez asked. He theorized that specific electromagnetic frequencies could create pockets where time moved differently, slower, faster, or even in loops. But his experiments were never successful, and he lost his academic position in 1991. Detective Morrison felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to connect. So Kowalski loses his job in 1991, starts an electrical company in 1992, and gets permission to conduct experimental work in this building owned by his uncle. It appears so, Mrs. Chen confirmed, and according to these work orders, they spent most of their time in apartment 4B and the basement directly below it. Why 4B specifically? Dr. Vasquez wondered. Mrs. Chen consulted her notes. The building was constructed in 1924 over the site of an old subway tunnel that was abandoned during construction. Apartment 4B sits directly over where the tunnel was supposed to connect to the main subway line. Kowalski's work orders mention unique geological properties and natural electromagnetic anomalies. Dr. Webb's readings suddenly spiked dramatically. Everyone needs to see this, he called from the dining room area. The electromagnetic field just increased by 300%, and I'm detecting what appears to be temporal displacement signatures. As the team gathered around his equipment, the voices of Jennifer and Michael Thompson became clearer and more present than they had ever been before. Michael, something's happening, Jennifer's voice came through with crystal clarity. The room is getting brighter and I can see people. There are people in our apartment. I see them too, Jen. They look like police officers, and there are these machines. Detective Morrison approached the area where the voices seemed strongest. Jennifer, Michael, we can hear you very clearly now. Can you see us? Yes, Michael's voice replied, filled with wonder and confusion. You're standing right in our living room, but you look strange, like you're glowing or like you're not quite real. Dr. Vasquez began documenting the interaction. This is unprecedented. We appear to be achieving direct communication across temporal dimensions. Jennifer, Dr. Vasquez said gently, we're here to help you. Can you tell us what you remember about the night you disappeared? Specifically, do you remember any unusual work being done in your building? The electrical work, Jennifer replied immediately. There were men working in the basement for weeks. They made strange sounds like humming or vibrating, and they worked at odd hours. Sometimes we could hear them working at 2 or 3 a.m. Did you ever interact with these workers? Detective Morrison asked. Once, Michael's voice answered. The supervisor came to our door the day before whatever happened to us. He said they needed to test some equipment in our apartment because we were directly over their main work area. Detective Morrison and Dr. Webb exchanged significant looks. What kind of testing did they do? They installed some kind of device in our electrical panel, Jennifer explained, said it was a new type of surge protector that would prevent power fluctuations. They told us to make sure we were home on October 20th because they would be running final tests that evening. Oh my God, Dr. Webb whispered. They didn't disappear accidentally. They were test subjects. Dr. Vasquez immediately contacted FBI headquarters to run background checks on Dr. Richard Kowalski and Temporal Dynamics, Inc. What she discovered over the next hour painted a disturbing picture of rogue scientific experimentation. Detective, she reported, Richard Kowalski was investigated by the FBI in 1993 for conducting unauthorized human experiments, but the case was closed when he disappeared and his company dissolved. There were reports of at least 3 other unexplained disappearances connected to buildings where Temporal Dynamics had done work. Where is Kowalski now? Detective Morrison asked. That's the problem. He vanished in February 1993, just 4 months after the Thompson incident. No body was ever found, and no trace of him has been discovered in 31 years. Meanwhile, Dr. Webb was making additional discoveries in the basement of the building. "Detective, you need to see this," he called over his radio. "I found Kowalski's laboratory." The basement beneath apartment 4B had been concealed behind a false wall that Mrs. Chen had never known existed. Inside, Dr. Webb discovered a sophisticated laboratory filled with electromagnetic field generators, temporal measurement equipment, and detailed notes about experiments in temporal displacement engineering. "This equipment is far more advanced than anything that should have existed in 1992, Dr. Webb explained as the team examined the lab. "Some of these components wouldn't be invented for another decade." Detective Morrison found Kowalski's research journals, which contained detailed plans for what he called Project Timelock. "Listen to this," Detective Morrison read from one of the journals. "October 20th, 1992, final test of Timelock protocol. Subjects J. Thompson and M. Thompson have been selected due to optimal electromagnetic compatibility and apartment location directly over temporal field generator. Hypothesis: electromagnetic field manipulation will create localized temporal loop, allowing subjects to exist in accelerated time while maintaining consciousness." He was trying to create a time loop, Dr. Vasquez realized, but something went wrong. Dr. Webb continued reading from another journal entry. "Subjects must be unaware of experiment to prevent psychological interference with temporal field resonance. Have installed monitoring device in apartment electrical system. Will initiate time lock during evening meal when subjects are relaxed and stationary." The full horror of what had happened to Jennifer and Michael Thompson began to sink in. They had been unknowing victims of an illegal human experiment that had trapped them in a temporal prison for over 3 decades. "But why can we hear them now?" Detective Morrison asked. "Why, after 32 years, are they suddenly audible to neighbors?" Dr. Webb studied his electromagnetic readings carefully. "The temporal field is destabilizing. Whatever Kowalski created in 1992 is breaking down. The electromagnetic generators in this basement have been running continuously for 32 years, and they're starting to fail." "What does that mean for Jennifer and Michael? If the field collapses completely, they could be lost forever. But if we can understand how Kowalski created the temporal loop, we might be able to reverse it." As if summoned by their conversation, Jennifer's voice came through the intercom system that Dr. Webb had connected to his detection equipment. "We can hear you talking about us," she said, her voice tinged with hope and desperation. "You said something about reversing what happened to us. Is that really possible?" "We're going to try," Dr. Vasquez assured her. "But we need to understand exactly what Dr. Kowalski did to you. Do you remember anything else about that night?" "The humming," Michael's voice replied. "It started during dinner, a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then the lights began to flicker and we felt strange, like the air was getting thicker. And then everything became dreamlike," Jennifer continued. "We finished dinner, watched TV, went to bed, and woke up to start the same day over again. We thought it was just déjà vu at first, but it kept happening. The same conversations, the same phone calls, the same everything." Dr. Webb was making rapid calculations based on the equipment readings and Kowalski's notes. "I think I understand what happened. Kowalski created a temporal field that isolated their apartment from the normal flow of time. They've been living in a 24-hour loop for 32 years, but from their perspective, they've only experienced that one day repeated thousands of times." "That's why they still think it's 1992, Dr. Vasquez realized. To them, it's always October 20th, 1992. Detective Morrison found another journal entry that made his blood run cold. "Subject monitoring indicates successful temporal isolation, but unexpected side effects observed. Subjects appear to be experiencing accelerated aging within the temporal field. Estimated lifespan within loop, 10-15 years maximum. Must find way to extract subjects before biological systems fail. He knew they were going to die, Detective Morrison said grimly. Kowalski knew his experiment would kill them, and he disappeared rather than face the consequences. Dr. Webb's equipment suddenly began alarming. "The electromagnetic field is fluctuating wildly," he announced. "Something's happening." The lights throughout the building began strobing erratically, and the temperature in apartment 4B dropped 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. Jennifer and Michael's voices became distorted and echo-laden. "Something's wrong," Jennifer's voice came through, now sounding distant and frightened. "The apartment is getting darker, and I feel like I'm fading away." "The temporal field is collapsing," Dr. Webb realized. "We're running out of time. If we're going to save them, we need to act now." But as the team scrambled to understand Kowalski's equipment and find a way to reverse the temporal loop, they discovered that the situation was even more complex than they had imagined. Mrs. Chen approached with another set of documents she had found in the building's storage room. "Detective, I found something else. Dr. Kowalski wasn't working alone. He had a partner, someone named Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Brooklyn Institute of Technology." "Where is Dr. Mitchell now?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "That's the strange part," Mrs. Chen replied. "According to these documents, she also disappeared in February 1993, the same time as Kowalski. But there's something else. She was reported missing from her laboratory at the Brooklyn Institute, and the last entry in her research log mentions emergency protocol activation and temporal extraction necessary." Dr. Webb looked up from Kowalski's equipment with a grim expression. "I think I know what happened to both of them. They didn't just disappear, they went into the temporal field themselves. You mean they're trapped like Jennifer and Michael? Worse, if they activated an emergency protocol, they might be trapped in a different temporal dimension entirely. And if that's true, then reversing the Thompson's temporal loop might require finding Kowalski and Mitchell first." The investigation had just become exponentially more complicated. What had started as voices from an empty apartment had evolved into a case involving rogue scientists, illegal human experimentation, and multiple people trapped in various temporal dimensions across Brooklyn. As the electromagnetic field continued to destabilize and Jennifer and Michael's voices grew fainter, Detective Morrison realized they were racing against time to save not just 2 people trapped in 1992, but potentially 4 people scattered across different temporal realities. The second phase of the investigation would require not just police work, but scientific expertise, temporal engineering, and perhaps most challenging of all, finding a way to communicate with people who might be trapped in time periods that hadn't even happened yet. As Chapter 2 concluded, one thing was certain. The mystery of apartment 4B was far from solved, and the stakes had just become a matter of life and death for people who had been caught in the crossfire of scientific ambition gone horribly wrong. The morning of October 18, 2024, brought Dr. Emma Chen from MIT's Temporal Physics Laboratory to Brooklyn with equipment that had never been tested outside of controlled laboratory conditions. As Jennifer and Michael Thompson's voices grew increasingly faint and distorted, the rescue team realized they had less than 24 hours before the couple would be lost forever in the collapsing temporal field. "The quantum resonance is deteriorating at an exponential rate," Dr. Chen explained as she set up her experimental temporal stabilization array in apartment 4B. "If we don't extract them from the time loop within the next 18 hours, the field collapse will scatter their consciousness across multiple temporal dimensions." Dr. Webb had spent the entire night analyzing Kowalski's equipment and research notes. "I figured out how the original experiment worked," he announced to the assembled team. Kowalski created a closed temporal loop using electromagnetic field manipulation, but he made a critical error in his calculations. The field was designed to be temporary, a few hours at most, but something caused it to become self-sustaining. Detective Morrison, who had been coordinating with federal authorities, looked up from his phone. The FBI located Dr. Sarah Mitchell's personal research files from 1993. According to her notes, she discovered that Kowalski's temporal field was destabilizing and tried to shut down the experiment. That's when both of them disappeared. They went into the field to try to save Jennifer and Michael, Dr. Vasquez realized, but something went wrong with their extraction protocol. Dr. Chen's equipment began detecting multiple temporal signatures throughout the building. You're right. I'm reading 4 distinct consciousness patterns trapped in overlapping temporal dimensions. The Thompsons are in a 24-hour loop, but Kowalski and Mitchell appear to be trapped in what I can only describe as temporal static, existing in multiple time periods simultaneously. As the team worked to understand the full scope of the situation, Jennifer's voice came through the communication array with increasing urgency. "Please hurry," she said, her voice now sounding hollow and distant. "Michael and I can feel ourselves fading. It's like we're becoming part of the walls, part of the building itself." "We're here, Jen," came Michael's voice, equally strained. "But I don't know how much longer we can hold on. Sometimes I forget who I am, and I have to remind myself that we're Jennifer and Michael Thompson, that we were going to move to Seattle." Dr. Webb had made a breakthrough in understanding Kowalski's temporal technology. "The key is synchronization," he explained. "All 4 trapped individuals need to be extracted simultaneously, or the temporal field will collapse completely and take them with it." "How do we extract people from multiple temporal dimensions?" Detective Morrison asked. "We don't extract them," Dr. Chen replied, making rapid calculations. "We bring all the temporal dimensions together into one coherent timeline, allowing everyone to exist in the same temporal space again." "The process, Doctor," Chen described, was theoretically possible, but had never been attempted. It required precise calibration of electromagnetic fields, quantum resonance manipulation, and most importantly, cooperation from the trapped individuals themselves. "Jennifer, Michael," Dr. Vasquez spoke into the communication array. "We need you to help us. We're going to try to bring you back to our timeline. But we need you to focus on the present moment, not October 20th, 1992, but today, October 18th, 2024. "That's impossible," Michael's voice replied. "We've tried to move forward from October 20th thousands of times. The day just repeats." "Because you're trapped in a temporal loop," Dr. Chen explained. "But we're going to break that loop. When we do, you need to accept that 32 years have passed. It's going to be disorienting and frightening, but you have to trust us." As Dr. Chen began the synchronization process, her equipment detected the presence of Kowalski and Mitchell's consciousness patterns more clearly. "I think I can communicate with them," she announced. "Dr. Kowalski, Dr. Mitchell, if you can hear me, we're attempting a full temporal extraction. We need your assistance." The response came through the array as a distorted, overlapping conversation that sounded like multiple people speaking at once. "Extraction. Dangerous. Field collapse. Tried before. Couldn't save them. That's Kowalski," Dr. Webb identified. "He's trying to warn us about something." "Mitchell. Here. Experiment. Wrong. Sarah. Help. Children." Dr. Chen worked to clarify the communication. "Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Kowalski, we understand that your previous extraction attempts failed. But we have new technology, new understanding. Will you help us save all 4 of you?" The response was clearer this time, as if the 2 scientists were focusing their consciousness to communicate more effectively. "Kowalski here. Been trying to fix this for 32 years. Temporal static makes it difficult to maintain coherent thought. Yes, we'll help. Mitchell, the children, Jennifer and Michael. They've been suffering because of our mistakes. Whatever it takes to free them. Dr. Chen began the complex process of temporal synchronization. The equipment in apartment 4B hummed with increasing intensity, and the electromagnetic readings throughout the building spiked to dangerous levels. Everyone needs to evacuate the building except essential personnel, Detective Morrison announced. If this goes wrong, the temporal field could expand and affect the entire block. Mrs. Chen and the other residents were evacuated to a safe distance, while Dr. Chen, Dr. Webb, Dr. Vasquez and Detective Morrison remained to monitor the extraction process. As the temporal fields began to synchronize, something extraordinary happened. The apartment around them began to shift and change, showing glimpses of different time periods simultaneously. Look, Dr. Vasquez pointed to the dining table. I can see multiple versions of the same moment. Indeed, the table showed overlapping images. The mummified dinner from 1992, a fresh meal that Jennifer and Michael were eating in their temporal loop, and the dust-covered surface that existed in 2024. The temporal barriers are breaking down, Dr. Chen observed. All timelines are becoming visible simultaneously. In one corner of the apartment, they could see Dr. Kowalski and Dr. Mitchell from 1993, frozen in the moment they had entered the temporal field to attempt their rescue. In another area, Jennifer and Michael were visible as translucent figures, still discussing their move to Seattle. This is it, Dr. Chen announced. I'm initiating full temporal convergence. Everyone hold on. The apartment filled with blinding light as 32 years of trapped time collapsed into a single moment. The electromagnetic field generators in the basement overloaded and shut down permanently, while the temporal stabilization array worked to merge all the displaced consciousness patterns into the present timeline. When the light faded, 4 very solid, very real people stood in apartment 4B for the first time since 1992. Jennifer and Michael Thompson appeared exactly as they had 32 years earlier, 28 years old, wearing the same clothes from their final dinner in 1992. But their eyes held the weight of someone who had experienced the same day thousands of times. Dr. Richard Kowalski and Dr. Sarah Mitchell materialized near the window, both appearing to be in their early 40s, the ages they had been when they disappeared in 1993. They looked disoriented, but relieved to finally exist in linear time again. Is it really over? Jennifer asked, her voice now coming from her physical form rather than through the communication array. Are we really free? It's over, Dr. Chen confirmed. The temporal loop has been broken permanently. Michael looked around the apartment, seeing it clearly for the first time in 32 years. Everything looks so old, he said in wonder. The furniture, the walls, even the dust looks ancient. Because it is, Detective Morrison explained gently. Today is October 18th, 2024. You've been trapped in a time loop for 32 years. The psychological impact hit both Jennifer and Michael simultaneously. Jennifer began to cry as the reality sank in, while Michael sat heavily in a chair, struggling to process what had happened to them. 32 years, Jennifer whispered. Our families, our friends, everyone we knew. Dr. Kowalski stepped forward, his face etched with guilt and remorse. Jennifer, Michael, I owe you an apology that I can never fully express. What Dr. Mitchell and I did to you was unconscionable. We used you as test subjects without your knowledge or consent. We tried to fix it, Dr. Mitchell added, tears streaming down her face. When we realized the temporal field was permanent instead of temporary, we entered the field ourselves to try to extract you. But we became trapped as well. Detective Morrison had been preparing for this moment throughout the investigation. Dr. Kowalski, Dr. Mitchell, you're both under arrest for conducting illegal human experimentation, kidnapping, and causing grievous harm. You have the right to remain silent. As the arrests were made, Dr. Chen worked with Jennifer and Michael to help them understand their situation and begin the process of reintegration into the modern world. Your parents are both still alive, Dr. Vasquez told them. They're elderly now. Your mother is 83 and your father is 85, but they never stopped hoping you would return. The news provided comfort and pain in equal measure. Jennifer and Michael had lost 32 years with their families, but they still had a chance to reconnect with their parents and rebuild their lives. "What about our apartment in Seattle?" Michael asked, still struggling with the temporal displacement. "The job, our plans." "Michael, Doctor," Chen said gently, "that was 1992. The company you were going to work for probably doesn't exist anymore. The Seattle you were planning to move to has changed dramatically. You're going to need time to adjust to the modern world." Over the following weeks, as Jennifer and Michael began the difficult process of adapting to 2024, the full scope of Kowalski and Mitchell's crimes became clear. The FBI investigation revealed that at least 6 other people had disappeared from buildings where Temporal Dynamics Inc. had conducted electrical work between 1991 and 1993. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Kowalski had been attempting to create a form of immortality through temporal manipulation, trapping people in time loops where they could theoretically live the same day forever without aging. He saw himself as a pioneer, Dr. Vasquez explained during Kowalski's trial. He believed that by perfecting temporal loops, he could give people eternal life. He didn't consider the psychological torture of living the same day repeatedly, or the fact that his subjects never consented to the experiments. Dr. Mitchell, who had genuinely tried to stop Kowalski's experiments and save the victims, received a lighter sentence in exchange for her cooperation in locating and rescuing the other missing persons. Her detailed knowledge of Kowalski's methods led to the successful extraction of 3 more trapped individuals from temporal anomalies in Manhattan and Queens. Jennifer and Michael Thompson faced the challenging process of rebuilding their lives in a world that had moved on without them. Technology, culture, politics, and society had all changed dramatically during their 32-year absence. Their reunion with their elderly parents was both joyful and heartbreaking. Jennifer's mother, now confined to a wheelchair but still sharp-minded at 83, held her daughter's face in her hands and cried. "I always knew you'd come back," she whispered. "I told everyone you weren't dead, that somehow, somewhere, you were still alive." Michael's father, despite his advanced age, was determined to help his son adjust to the modern world. "Son, you missed a lot," he said with a smile, "but we've got time now to catch up." The psychological support team, led by Dr. Vasquez, worked intensively with both Jennifer and Michael to help them process not just the temporal displacement, but the thousands of repetitions of the same day they had experienced. "The hardest part," Jennifer explained during one of her therapy sessions, "isn't the technology or the cultural changes. It's the lost time. We missed our parents' aging, our friends' marriages, the birth of our nieces and nephews. We missed entire decades of life." Michael struggled with similar feelings. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it's October 21st, 1992, and I'm confused when the day doesn't follow the script I remember. We lived the same conversations, the same arguments, the same moments of happiness thousands of times. Learning to live spontaneously again is harder than learning to use a smartphone, but there were also unexpected benefits to their experience. Jennifer and Michael had an unbreakable bond, forged by sharing the same impossible experience for over 3 decades. They understood each other in ways that few couples ever could. "We learned every detail about each other," Jennifer said. "Every fear, every hope, every thought. When you live the same day with someone thousands of times, There are no secrets left. The Thompson apartment at 247 Atlantic Avenue was transformed into a research center for temporal anomaly studies, with Dr. Chen leading a team of scientists studying the long-term effects of temporal displacement. The basement laboratory where Kowalski had conducted his experiments became a museum dedicated to the victims of illegal human experimentation. Dr. Kowalski was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, and conducting illegal human experiments. During his sentencing, he showed no remorse, insisting that his work would have eventually benefited all of humanity. "I was on the verge of conquering death itself," he told the court. "These people were willing sacrifices for the greater good of science." Dr. Mitchell received a sentence of 15 years in federal prison, but became an advocate for victims of unethical scientific experimentation while serving her time. She worked with researchers to develop protocols for identifying and rescuing other potential temporal displacement victims. As 2024 drew to a close, Jennifer and Michael Thompson had made remarkable progress in adapting to the modern world. Jennifer discovered that her graphic design skills, while outdated, could be updated, and she found work with a company that specialized in vintage and retro design. Michael's software engineering background was more challenging to update, but his unique perspective on technology led to consulting opportunities with companies developing user interfaces for elderly populations. Most importantly, they had each other and a second chance at the life that had been stolen from them 32 years earlier. On December 20th, 2024, exactly 2 months after their extraction from the temporal loop, Jennifer and Michael Thompson stood on the observation deck of the Empire State Building, looking out over a New York City that was both familiar and completely transformed. "Do you ever regret it?" Jennifer asked, holding Michael's hand. "Do you ever wish we had just lived those 32 years normally, even if it meant we might not be together now?" Michael considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I think about what we lost," he said. "But then I remember that we got something most couples never have, absolute certainty that we can handle anything together. We survived something impossible. Whatever challenges the future holds, we'll face them like we faced that endless October day, together." Jennifer smiled and leaned against her husband. "Besides," she said, "we've got a lot of living to make up for." As they watched the sunset over Manhattan, both Jennifer and Michael felt something they hadn't experienced in decades: the anticipation of an unknown tomorrow. The temporal loop that had trapped them was broken, the scientists responsible were in prison, and they had their whole lives ahead of them once again. The Thompson apartment mystery had been solved, but more importantly, 2 lives that had been stolen by scientific hubris had been returned to their rightful place in the world. It was a reminder that some things, love, hope, and the human spirit, are stronger than time itself. Detective Morrison, who had received commendations for his work on the case, kept in touch with Jennifer and Michael as they adjusted to their new lives. The case had changed his perspective on what was possible in police work and had earned him a position with the FBI's new Temporal Anomaly Investigation Unit. "You never know what's behind a closed door," he often told new recruits. "Sometimes it's just an empty room, but sometimes it's people who have been waiting 32 years for someone to finally hear their voices and bring them home." The voices from apartment 4B were finally silent. Not because they had faded away, but because they had found peace in the present day. Jennifer and Michael Thompson were home at last.